Florida looks like paradise from the outside. Beaches, sunshine, theme parks, the whole postcard. But spend enough time in the state, and you start noticing the part they leave off the brochure. The sinkholes, the snakes, the underwater caves that have been swallowing people for decades, and the giant pythons that are quietly eating everything. These are 15 insanely dangerous places in Florida you've never heard of. Place 15? Eagle's Nest Sinkhole, Weeki Wachee. From the surface, Eagle's Nest looks like a muddy pond you'd drive past without blinking. Algae green water, a wooden boardwalk, a sign with an image of the Grim Reaper that reads, "Stop. Prevent your death." There's nothing in this cave worth dying for. That sign is not decorative. Eagle's Nest Sinkhole sits in the Chassahowitzka Wildlife Management Area, about 60 miles north of Tampa. Beneath that unremarkable surface lies a vertical shaft that drops more than 300 feet into a branching cave network with a mile of passages, constricted tunnels, pitch-black rooms, and silt that destroys visibility the moment anyone disturbs it. Divers call it the Mount Everest, or Grand Canyon of cave diving. Beautiful and extraordinarily lethal. More than 10 divers have died at Eagle's Nest since 1981. Among them were Patrick Peacock, 53, and Chris Rittenmeyer, 38. Both experienced Fort Lauderdale divers who had dived the site multiple times before. In October 2016, they entered the water together and never resurfaced. Their bodies were found the following morning at 260 feet, in a complex area of the cave system. The state closed Eagle's Nest to divers in 1999 after a string of fatalities, then reopened it in 2003 under pressure from diving advocacy groups. Today, registration is required before each dive, and the Grim Reaper sign remains. It's like a Venus flytrap. You get in there and there is so much to see you get distracted, and it gets deep quickly. Sylvester Muller, Vice Chairman of the National Speleological Society's Cave Diving Section. Place 14, Sinkhole Alley, Pasco, Hernando, and Hillsborough counties. Most people who buy a house in the Tampa Bay area don't know they're living on what geologists and insurance adjusters have quietly nicknamed Sinkhole Alley. The three-county stretch of Pasco, Hernando, and Hillsborough has the highest concentration of sinkhole activity in Florida, which is saying something since no part of the state is immune. Florida sits on a foundation of porous limestone that rainwater slowly dissolves from below. Over thousands of years, this process carves out underground cavities. When those cavities grow large enough to no longer support the weight of whatever is above them, a road, a yard, a bedroom, they collapse. Sometimes it happens gradually. Sometimes it happens in the middle of the night without any warning. In February 2013, a sinkhole opened beneath the bedroom of Jeff Bush in Seffner, a community northeast of Tampa, while he was sleeping. His brother Jeremy heard a crash and found the floor had opened up. Emergency responders could not recover Jeff Bush. The home was demolished. A marker now stands where the house was. The sinkhole reopened in 2015 and was filled again. In July 2017, a sinkhole in Land O'Lakes opened and swallowed 2 homes outright, condemning 7 more. In the 1981 Winter Park sinkhole, technically just outside Sinkhole Alley but built on the same geology, the ground opened beneath a swimming pool, a Porsche dealership, several businesses, and a home, eventually forming what is now called Lake Rose. That crater measured 350 feet across and 75 feet deep. Development has made things worse. Research by the National Cave and Karst Research Institute found that sinkhole risk is 11 times greater in developed areas than undeveloped ones. Place 13. Deep Hole, Myakka River State Park, Sarasota. Deep Hole is exactly what it sounds like. A static sinkhole located in the wilderness, preserved section of Myakka River State Park near Sarasota. It plunges roughly 130 feet into the earth. The water at the bottom is low in oxygen, high in hydrogen sulfide, and essentially hostile to most living things. Fish carcasses litter the floor of the hole, likely dying when they sink below the oxygenated layer and suffocate. No significant plant life exists at the bottom. It is not a welcoming environment in any biological sense. None of that is what makes Deep Hole famous. During the dry season, when water sources across the park shrink and concentrate, alligators converge on Deep Hole in extraordinary numbers. More than 100 American alligators have been recorded gathering there simultaneously, with counts reaching upward of 150 during peak dry season conditions. They pile along the banks and crowd into the water. An improbable mass of large reptiles stacked into a space the size of a backyard pool, with more arriving on the surrounding bank as water levels elsewhere in the park drop. The surrounding hiking trails and fishing areas in Myakka River State Park are popular and generally considered safe, with maintained access routes and regular ranger presence. Deep Hole itself is inside the Wilderness Preserve section, which requires a permit to access and involves a substantial hike. The alligators gathered there are not specifically interested in people. Still, 150 alligators in a sinkhole you can stand next to is not something most people picture when they picture a Florida state park. It is also, in its own way, one of the more remarkable wildlife spectacles in the state, which is why wildlife photographers make the hike every dry season. Place 12. Devil's Den. Spring, Williston, Levy County. Devil's Den is a karst window, a cave whose ceiling collapsed thousands of years ago, leaving a hole that opens onto an underground pool. Steam rises from the spring on cold winter mornings, which local folklore says is why it was named after the devil. In the 1930s, a farmer who owned the property used to drag trespassers off his land when they kept sneaking in to swim. It eventually became a dive site. The underground pool is genuinely beautiful. Clear, 72-degree spring water, fossils of mastodons, saber-toothed cats, and ground sloths embedded in the limestone walls. It dates to between 10,000 and 75,000 years ago. Human remains and artifacts from around 7,500 years ago were also recovered from inside. It's a remarkable place. The caves extending from the pool are a different matter. The passages are tight, low flow, high in silt, and widely described by trained cave divers as among the most unforgiving conditions in Florida. In October 1990, a diver with no cave certification entered the cave system, stirred up silt in a passage about 2 feet high at 70 feet depth, and ran out of air. He drowned 200 feet into the cave. In July 1995, 2 firefighters from Mobile, Alabama, both certified only for open water diving, pulled down the safety gate blocking cave access and entered. One of them never came out. His body was recovered at 35 feet. Devil's Den is a popular snorkel and scuba destination today. The dive platform is accessible, the cavern area is manageable with proper certification. The caves beyond that are for trained cave divers only, and those trained cave divers still die there. Place 11. The Everglades Python Zone, South Florida. Spend enough time talking about Florida's Burmese python problem and people start to tune it out. It's been discussed for years, it's been hunted for years, and yet somehow the snakes keep winning. But the actual facts of what's happened in the Everglades are worth sitting with for a moment. Burmese pythons first appeared in the Everglades in the 1970s and 1980s through the pet trade. People buying large exotic snakes and releasing them when they got too large to manage. Hurricane Andrew in 1992 accelerated the problem when it destroyed a python breeding facility and released unknown numbers of snakes into the surrounding ecosystem. By the early 2000s, scientists confirmed a breeding population. By then, it was too late to stop what was coming. The largest Burmese python ever captured in Florida measured over 18 feet. The species can grow to 20 feet and beyond. Conservatively, tens of thousands are estimated to be in the greater Everglades region right now, though some estimates reach into the hundreds of thousands. Researchers believe only about 1% of Burmese pythons are ever seen or captured. Since the population established itself, raccoons in Everglades National Park have declined by 99.3%, opossums by 98.9%, bobcats by 87.5%. Marsh rabbits and foxes have effectively disappeared from large portions of the park. A 2015 study released 95 marsh rabbits fitted with radio transmitters into python habitat. Within 11 months, 77% were dead, the majority killed by pythons. More than 23,000 pythons have been removed from Florida to date. Scientists believe that represents a fraction of the actual population, since only 1% are ever encountered. A Florida Python Challenge hunting contest runs annually, and the snakes are still spreading. Place 10. Fakahatchee Strand, Preserve State Park, Collier County. Fakahatchee Strand is sometimes called the Amazon of North America. That's promotional material, but it's not entirely wrong. The 70,000-acre subtropical swamp in southwestern Florida near Naples is one of the most biologically dense places in the state. It's also genuinely difficult and occasionally hazardous to move through, depending on how far off the marked paths you go. The park is home to Florida panthers, black bears, American alligators, and some of the highest cottonmouth water moccasin density in the state. Wading into the swamp, which is how sections of the park are accessed, means moving through knee-deep water of uncertain depth over submerged cypress roots and mud in an environment where visibility into the water is limited. Cottonmouths are thick-bodied pit vipers that don't retreat the way many snakes do. They coil, open their mouths to display the white interior that gave them their name, and hold their ground. Their venom is hemolytic, meaning it breaks down tissue and has a documented mortality rate in untreated bites. In Fakahatchee, encounters on the trail are not rare. Hikers and guides regularly report cottonmouths blocking the path, sometimes large enough that moving them off the trail requires considerable effort. Park biologist Mike Owen, who spent more than 3 decades leading hikes into Fakahatchee, noted that in nearly 500 guided trips into the swamp, he had never lost a visitor. That is a genuine testament to experience and awareness. It is also perhaps a testament to how many ways things could go wrong if you didn't have both. Place 9. Big Cypress National Preserve, Collier and Monroe Counties. Big Cypress is 729,000 acres of swampland, marshes, and estuaries in southwest Florida. If you look at it on a map, it doesn't have the obvious bodies of water, the big lakes and wide rivers that typically register as dangerous. Instead, the entire landscape is water, spread across thousands of acres of cypress dome swamp, wet prairie, and mangrove forest. There are no neat edges. The trail, in many sections of Big Cypress, is whatever path you can navigate through waist-deep standing water. Big Cypress has everything dangerous that Florida produces in one place. Cottonmouths, eastern diamondback rattlesnakes, Florida panthers, black bears, alligators, and during the rainy season, May through October, vast portions of the preserve become submerged. Hiking or off-road travel through Big Cypress outside of established routes during wet season means moving through chest-deep water at times, in low visibility, in an environment where you cannot see your own feet or what is sharing the water with you. The preserve is legally open for hunting, which creates its own category of hazard. During hunting season, off-road vehicles, firearms, and dense vegetation overlap in ways that require navigation skills and significant awareness of your surroundings. The Burmese python population has established itself through Big Cypress, making it one of the areas where the combined density of native predators and invasive constrictors is higher than almost anywhere else in the United States. The combination of dense vegetation and standing water means encountering a python on the ground is difficult to predict at the best of times and impossible to predict at the worst. Place 8. Camp Blanding Training Site. Sinkholes, Clay County. Camp Blanding is a Florida National Guard training facility northeast of Gainesville in Clay County. It covers roughly 73,000 acres of pine forests, wetlands, and lakes, and a significant portion of it is underlain by karst limestone that has produced a number of large sinkholes on the property over the years. What makes Camp Blanding unusual in the context of this list is the combination of active military training, unexploded ordnance from decades of use, and unstable ground. Portions of the installation that were used for artillery and mortar training contain ground that has not been fully cleared of unexploded shells, combined with a geology that produces sinkholes without warning. The intersection of those two hazards, ground that can move unpredictably and ground that may contain live ordnance, is something you won't find on many civilian hiking trails. The public does not have access to the active training portions of Camp Blanding, and the military restricts movement in areas of known or suspected ordnance. Clay County has over the years received reports of unexploded ordnance turning up in surrounding areas as the water table moves and soil shifts, a consequence of both the active range use and the karst geology that makes things buried underground unpredictable. The combination of ground that can open unexpectedly and an environment with a documented explosive history makes it a specific type of hazard that exists nowhere else on this list. Place 7. Warm Mineral Springs, Sarasota County. Warm Mineral Springs, near North Port in Sarasota County, is one of the oldest archaeological sites in North America. Human remains found in the spring have been dated to approximately 10,000 years ago. The spring is genuinely warm, around 87 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, fed by geothermal activity underground, which makes it popular with visitors who come for the warmth, the unusual mineral content of the water, and the surrounding nature. It is also one of the most complex and least explored underwater cave systems in Florida. The spring drops into a sinkhole approximately 230 feet deep. Below about 40 feet, the water transitions into an anaerobic layer, essentially devoid of oxygen, that preserves organic material almost perfectly. Ancient human remains and bones of Pleistocene-era animals have been found there in extraordinary condition. Divers willing and qualified to work at depth in anoxic conditions have described it as one of the most archaeologically significant underwater sites in the Americas. Multiple divers have died at Warm Mineral Springs. The spring's complex structure, the transition between oxygenated and anaerobic layers, and the significant depth make it a serious technical diving site requiring specialized training and equipment. The spring has seen various ownership and access disputes over the years, and access for recreational diving has been inconsistent. For those who don't understand what 87-degree water and tourist branding can hide, the bottom of this spring is a zone where organic material stops decomposing because there's no oxygen. That is the same environment that preserves 10,000-year-old human remains in usable condition. Place 6. Paynes Prairie Preserve, Alachua County. Paynes Prairie is a 21,000-acre state preserve south of Gainesville that looks, from the right vantage point, like an open savanna. It has a boardwalk, a visitor center, and well-marked hiking trails. It is a popular destination for birders, wildlife photographers, and people who want to see the herd of American bison that roams the preserve. Florida horses, descendants of Spanish colonial horses, also range there freely. It's genuinely one of the more unexpected wildlife experiences in the state. What Paynes Prairie also has, free-roaming alligators in numbers that would close most parks in other states, one of the highest concentrations of cottonmouth water moccasins in north-central Florida, eastern diamondback rattlesnakes, and the La Chua Trail, a popular hiking path that leads directly through active alligator habitat in a section that floods regularly throughout the spring and summer. The alligators here are not behind fences or viewing platforms. They're in the water next to the trail, on the trail banks, and occasionally on the trail itself. In 2019, the preserve temporarily closed several trail sections following multiple aggressive alligator encounters, including at least one incident involving physical contact with a hiker. The preserve periodically posts seasonal warnings about alligator activity near specific trail sections, particularly following periods of wet weather. The experience of walking the La Chua Trail during late spring, when the prairie is flooded, alligator nesting activity is high, and the bird life is extraordinary, is one of the most wildlife-dense hikes available to the public in the eastern United States. That is also a fairly complete description of why it requires your full attention from the moment you step out of the parking lot. Place 5. Seahorse Key, Levy County. Seahorse Key is a small island in the Gulf of Mexico off the Cedar Key coast, accessible only by boat. It's part of the Cedar Keys National Wildlife Refuge and home to one of the largest colonial wading bird nesting sites on Florida's Gulf Coast. Herons, egrets, and hingas and other species nest there in concentrated numbers during breeding season. It is a genuinely spectacular wildlife location. It is also one of the most concentrated cottonmouth habitats anywhere in North America. The cottonmouth population on Seahorse Key exists under unusual ecological conditions. The snakes feed largely on fish dropped by the nesting birds above them, which means their diet differs from cottonmouths on the mainland. Because food is concentrated and reliable during nesting season, the population density on the island is extraordinarily high compared to comparable land masses. The water surrounding the island, the thick vegetation, and the limited space mean that cottonmouths are encountered regularly. On the ground, in the vegetation, and along the shoreline where the birds dropped fish attract the snakes toward the water's edge. Access to Seahorse Key is restricted from March through June during nesting season. Outside that window, the refuge is technically accessible by boat, though the dense snake population makes careless exploration genuinely hazardous. University of Florida biologists have studied the island's snake population over decades and consistently documented density levels that would be considered exceptional by any standard comparison. Anyone who visits Seahorse Key should understand that the cottonmouth population there is among the densest of any comparable site we have measured. University of Florida, herpetologists, based on long-term population studies at the site, place 4. The Sulphur Springs area, Tampa. Sulphur Springs was once a resort destination. In the early 20th century, the naturally occurring spring drew visitors who believed the sulfur-rich water had therapeutic benefits. A pool, a tower, and boardwalk infrastructure made it a working tourist attraction from the 1920s onward. There were concession stands, entertainment, the whole package. Tampa marketed the springs as a health destination in the same era when such claims were much easier to make without regulatory pushback. By the 1980s, all of that had collapsed, literally and economically. The spring itself remains, feeding into the Hillsborough River through a concrete structure. The surrounding neighborhood of Sulphur Springs is one of Tampa's most economically challenged areas, with long-standing concerns documented in city planning reports and public health assessments. The abandoned resort infrastructure, what remains of it, has deteriorated substantially. The spring pool was formally closed in 1986 due to bacterial contamination and safety concerns. Despite that, people have continued to enter the spring water from the banks of the Hillsborough River adjacent to the spring outflow. The Hillsborough River in this area carries documented contamination, and swimming in or near the spring outflow has resulted in health incidents over the years. Tampa has periodically announced revitalization plans for the Sulphur Springs neighborhood. Progress has been incremental. What remains is a legitimate natural spring with genuine historical interest, sitting in a context that makes it one of the more layered and complicated entries on this list. Dangerous for multiple unrelated reasons simultaneously. Place 3. Lake Apopka, Orange and Lake Counties. Lake Apopka was once one of the most productive bass fishing lakes in the southeastern United States. Then the 20th century happened to it. Agricultural runoff from farms on the lake's northern shore, combined with decades of discharge from a pesticide manufacturing plant and various industrial sources, turned Lake Apopka into one of the most polluted lakes in Florida. By the 1980s, the lake was thick with algae, water clarity had essentially collapsed, and the alligator population was exhibiting documented reproductive abnormalities caused by endocrine-disrupting pesticide residues. Research by biologist Louis Gillette of the University of Florida found that male alligators in Lake Apopka had dramatically reduced testosterone levels and structural abnormalities in reproductive organs. Direct evidence of chemical contamination working through the food chain into animal biology. The lake also became the site of one of Florida's worst bird mortality events in 1998 and 1999. After the state bought out the farms on the lake's northern shore and flooded the fields to restore wetlands, thousands of birds, including herons, egrets, white ibis, and cormorants, died in what appeared to be pesticide poisoning from the contaminated soils now submerged beneath restored water. Estimates of over 400,000 birds using the area during this period were recorded, and documented deaths reached well into the thousands. Lake Apopka is still under active rehabilitation. Water quality has improved meaningfully since the 1990s, but fish consumption advisories remain in effect for the lake. The sediment in several areas retains significant pesticide concentrations, and the alligators that still inhabit the lake carry tissue contamination loads that raise the question of what exactly ends up at the top of a heavily polluted food chain. Place 2. Cape Canaveral's Mosquito Lagoon, Brevard and Volusia counties. Mosquito Lagoon is a shallow estuary along Florida's central Atlantic coast, part of the Canaveral National Seashore north of the Kennedy Space Center. It is one of the most productive redfish and sea trout fishing areas on the East Coast, a designated national estuary and home to extraordinary concentrations of bottlenose dolphins, manatees, and sea turtles. It is also surrounded by restricted federal land in ways that are not always obvious to visitors. The primary physical hazard at Mosquito Lagoon isn't the wildlife. It's the combination of shallow water, shifting sandbars, and stingrays. The lagoon averages less than 4 feet in depth across large sections, which means powerboats regularly run aground if the operator doesn't know the channels. More persistently, the tidal flats around the lagoon are prime habitat for southern stingrays, which bury themselves in the sand and become invisible at depth. Wading in Mosquito Lagoon without doing the stingray shuffle, the dragging feet-on-the-bottom step that every Florida wade fisher learns, produces a genuine risk of stepping directly onto a ray. Stingray injuries in the lagoon are not rare. The area also sits adjacent to Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, and the military has historical and ongoing control of portions of the surrounding shoreline. Kayakers and boaters who explore too far north along the national seashore have encountered restricted zone boundaries at points where signage has been inconsistent. The name alone should have been a clue that this wasn't going to be uncomplicated. Mosquito Lagoon was named, rather honestly, for its mosquitoes. Place 1. Manchineel tree habitats, South Florida coasts. The Manchineel tree is real, it's in Florida, and it holds a well-documented place in the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's most dangerous tree. It grows along coastal areas of South Florida, the Keys, and portions of the Gulf Coast. The Manchineel produces a small green fruit that resembles a crabapple. Eating one causes severe chemical burns to the mouth and throat. The sap of the tree, which flows from the bark and leaves, is a powerful caustic that causes blistering on contact with skin. Standing under a Manchineel tree during rain is enough to transfer sap-contaminated water onto exposed skin and cause burns. Burning the wood produces smoke that can cause temporary blindness and severe lung irritation. Even touching a Manchineel tree directly and then touching your eyes is documented to cause eye damage. The tree is not widespread, but it exists in areas that people commonly access: coastal hammocks, the Keys, and portions of Everglades National Park. Signs are sometimes posted near known specimens, not always. Hikers in southern Florida coastal areas occasionally identify them too late, having already handled fallen leaves or fruit from the ground. Florida has a lot of things that can cause you genuine harm. The Manchineel tree has the distinction of being one of the only ones capable of doing it without you picking it up, stepping on it, or going anywhere near the water. Florida is not trying to kill you, but it's also not particularly concerned about your comfort level. The same geology that produces those famous clear springs also produces sinkholes that open under bedrooms at night. The same warm water that makes the beaches inviting also keeps the cottonmouths active year-round. And the same subtropical ecosystem that draws 130 million visitors a year is also home to tens of thousands of apex predators that no one planned for. A tree capable of burning your skin in the rain, a lake that spent decades becoming a chemistry experiment, and an underground cave system where the Grim Reaper himself is on duty as a signpost. Most of the places on this list are accessible, legally or otherwise. Some of them are genuinely beautiful. Some of them are beautiful and actively hazardous at the same time, which is something Florida has always been better at than anywhere else in the country. All of them deserve more respect than they typically get. If this was useful to you, hit the like button. It genuinely helps reach more people who want this kind of content. And if you want more on the side of Florida they don't put in the brochure, subscribe. New videos go up regularly.